Dear students, today we are going to talk about William Wordsworth and his poem French Revolution. Uh, William Wordsworth was a very well known representative romantic poet. He was born in 1770 and he continued till 1850. Uh, he is known for his experimentation with poetic diction and poetic subject, and he became more popular by his collaboration and collaborative work with Samuel Taylor Coleridge, which made them famous as Lake District poets, and it came to be known as a different school of poetry. Like many romantic poets, he was greatly influenced by French Revolution, and in during his entire career, there are direct and indirect influence of French Revolution and its aftermath. Today, we are going to talk about one of the representative poem, which is titled "The French Revolution as it appeared to enthusiasts at its commencement." Now, William Wordsworth wrote this poem in 1805 and it was published in 1809. Uh, it was this poem was part of a larger work that came to be known as the Prelude, which was published in 1850. First, we will have a look at the poem, and then we'll talk about the poem and its possible meanings. First of all, I'll recite the poem, and then we'll be able to look into it. The poem begins like this: "Oh, pleasant exercise of hope and joy! For mighty were the auxiliaries which then stood upon our side, we who were strong in love. Bliss was it in that dawn to be alive, but to be young was very heaven. O times, in which the meagre, stale, forbidding ways of custom, laws, and statute look at once the attraction of a country in romance. When reason seemed the most to assert her rights, when most intent on making of herself a prime enchantress, to assist the work which then was going forward in her name. Not favored sports alone, but the whole earth, the beauty war of promise, that which sets, as at some moment might not be unfelt among the bowers of paradise itself. The budding rose above the rose full blown, what temper and at the prospect did not wake, to happiness unthought of. The inert were roused, and lively natures swept away. They who had fed their childhood upon dreams, the playfellows of fancy, who had made all powers of swiftness, subtlety, and strength their ministers, who in lordly wise had stirred among the grandest objects of the sense, and dealt with whatsoever they found there as if they had within some lurking right to wield it. They, too, who of gentle mood had watched all gentle motions, and to these had fitted their own thoughts, schemers more mild, and in the region of their peaceful selves. Now, was it that both found, the meek and lofty did both find, helpers to their heart's desire, and stuff at hand, plastic as they could wish, were pulled upon to exercise their skill, not in utopia, subterranean fields, or some secreted island, heaven knows where, but in the very world which is the world of all of us, the place where in the end we find our happiness or not at all." So as you see, this is one of the poem by a representative romantic writer, which directly talks about French Revolution. Now, what he meant by this poem, it initially was a large part of the larger work that he was writing, the Prelude, which was highly autobiographical. But later on, with help of Coleridge, it was also published in a collection named The Friend. The title stands for the excitement, caused by the French Revolution, which seemed obvious and immediate. Because if you look at the lifespan of Wordsworth, then when this poem came, he was 35 years old, and so very young. And that's why it became very important for him to respond to the changes that were taking place in Europe generally and France in particular. During this time, he also visited France number of times, stayed there for a considerable period of time, indulged into a relationship with a French woman whose name was Annette, and probably had a daughter out of that relationship. The only thing is that he couldn't meet them, once he left France and came to England. Now, it indicates, the title itself indicates the revolution's emphasis on men's equality, and which again can be traced in Wordsworth's work and his poetry and his poetic diction and poetic style, which is the language of common man and the low subject matter. So this poetic diction and the subject that he experimented with in the course of time in his literary career, that is to some extent a very direct influence of the French Revolution and its aftermath. The effect was a literary revolution that mirrors the historical revolution, that is French Revolution, by breaking down the boundaries that separated poetry. So Wordsworth, in his diction and his style, is unlike classicist. He is unlike his predecessors. He is very much unique and very much different, and this influence makes him different. The poem can be read in three parts. There are three distinct stages of this poem, which is in 40 lines. The first part deals with initial response to French Revolution and the possible or obvious enthusiasm that it suggests, which is very much evident also in the title itself. It also sums up the public enthusiasm among both the growing middle classes and the oppressed working class, which greeted the beginning of French Revolution. Because in France, this was the first revolution that took place even otherwise in Europe, which was starting from below. Who initiated this revolution, this movement, were ordinary people, working class people. And that's why for Wordsworth it became necessary to employ their language, their issues, and to construct this poetry. The beginning also talks about youthful embrace of revolution's prospects. The famous lines that you come across in this poem, which are for which Wordsworth is remembered, are bliss was it in that down to be alive, but to be young was very heaven. So this celebrating this youth is the most prominent part of the beginning of the poem, and he is full of enthusiasm and this spirited youth that is visible in the beginning of the poem. The second part deals with the shaping of the French Revolution. From the moment he starts talking about reason and its effects, actually what he is doing is he is reflecting the doctrines of William Godwin, who believed that reason and rationale can raise human beings, and which can help individuals to rise to great heights and yet not sacrifice their basic nature. So this whole idea of raising individuals without sacrificing their basic human element or basic human nature is very much strong in the middle of the poem, which Wordsworth strongly believed and made it a point to get visible in his entire poetic contribution. The middle part of the poem, somewhere ends with this undying optimism, which even the entire French Revolution began with. It started with. So this is very prominent in the middle part of the poem. The third part deals with poet's response to French Revolution at personal and political level. Now, as we discussed in the beginning, he was very much associated with France in many ways, more than one ways. It was not only social or political or his literary association, but his personal one. And his relationship with Annette, influenced to a great extent in his political career. And that's why the end also can be, or the last part of the poem can also be read as a response to personal loss. Now, this realization of failure of French Revolution definitely troubled these romantics, and especially Wordsworth, who was expecting great results from French Revolution. And that's why this is also evident in his poem, which is addressed to French Revolution, that feeling of collapse, a feeling of deterioration, feeling of failure of the promise that French Revolution began with, the kind of ideals that it stood for, the kind of spirit that it stood for. So this led to a number of changes or shifts in Wordsworth's personal as well as poetic career. One of them is which led to his conservative attitude towards politics, as the way he began as a liberal voice or an individual with the beginning of French Revolution, and gradually he realized the failure of French Revolution as it turned more violent with more bloodshed. There is a sense of disillusionment, and this disillusionment is very much evident in the last part of the poem. Though the last two lines, as it is evident, it ends with optimism. The poem as a whole, stands for heralding the decline of classicism and birth of the period of romanticism. So it can be considered one of the representative poems of this age, of this time, where the poem can be read also as a manifesto of romantic notion of freedom. And though he is at the last line, as it suggests, he is not sure of the happiness that was promised by the French Revolution, but he is hopeful that individuals will be able to exercise or reach at that level where they will be able to realize their mistakes and overcome them. So for him, French Revolution as a movement is not a total failure. There is still hope left. And considering Godwin's opinion about humanity and human beings and their future, he opines that human beings can overcome their errors and relearn and learn from them. So the poem ends with a note of hope and optimism, which is a very characteristic trait of romantic poets. So French Revolution is a representative poem by William Wordsworth, which echoes the changes and shifts that took place during Romantic time, and it's a very representative poem. Thank you very much.